Hey Jason, how's it going?
Hey Ryan, it's going well. How are you?
Not too bad. I feel like I'm full of energy. I've spent the weekend coding, which is odd for me. I figured I'd talk a little bit about a method of coding. So we've talked about vibe coding, or maybe I like to call it vibe-driven development as opposed to test-driven development. But I was trying out that what the kids are calling this YOLO mode. So you only live once. You just have the AI just say yes to everything and basically auto accept. Now, there's a bunch of caution here. So there's a few things that I'll get around. But the first thing I'll do is say I was trying to test the website out as I was migrating it from static HTML to Astro. So I'm just going
Our
to quickly
website.
share my screen here. Yeah, go ahead.
I should clarify. Our website's what you're referring to?
My sincerest apologies. That is in fact correct. So
Yes.
we'll start with this is the Docker container here, but this is the actual website. So it's the AI-tools-lab.com website. So this is the
Yeah.
main site.
Yeah.
And it's mostly static HTML. There's some JavaScript and stuff like that in here, but it's pretty plain, which is good. This is a great test of, say, migrating like an internal website that might have been written in HTML pages a while ago that you've been maintaining. There's some craft, that kind of stuff. So it's not bad, but it's just that there's a lot of context, or there's a lot of files, or maybe a lot of content even. Because we're talking about transcripts as well as HTML page, as well as some of the CSS that's quite big. And I found that this is a pretty good example of maybe not a big project, but like a small or medium sized project. And maybe where the limits of some of the models are now versus where some of the strengths are in terms of testing and automation, which I was pretty impressed with. And I think this is why I ended up coding all weekend, because it was actually pretty fun to play
Yeah.
around with. On top of this, I was learning something new called Astro. I think you were also learning about it maybe in a different way on Friday, but it does look pretty cool as a way to put out documentation in a static website sort of way. I think you've used Hugo in the past or
Mm-hmm.
Gatsby. Yeah.
Yeah. Hugo, I've used quite a bit for different projects. And you're right. On Friday, we had our team had our usual end of week stand up, and
Right.
the topic of Astro came up within the community stand up. And I sent you a DM in Slack. And I was like, hey, we should talk about Astro
Right.
because to your point, like this whole site's just HTML. It was created because of the this project. Basically, it was just a part of the experiment. Now it's getting to the point where it's hard to manage, and I'm like, I'm personally going through every post and making sure the HTML looks right, and inevitably there's something a little
Right.
off. And I was like, this just doesn't scale. We need to switch to a content management system ish type of thing where we're just giving markdown to something and it
Right.
builds our site. So that's where how we ended up, I guess it sounds like both of us obsessing to some degree over Astro over the
A
weekend.
little bit. I got to say, I really do frameworks or different ways of working about things. And I think that promise of being able to just bring your markdown files and how something worked to me sounded like a that virtuous cycle or something I'd want to chase essentially. So to get there, what is it? How many yaks do I need to shave in order to get to that point? Was what I was thinking, and I thought this would be pretty easy. So that I think the crux or the impetus in my mind was visual comparison of those pages should be simple. Was that it may be what I was wrong about in the beginning. So I was like, okay, what I'm going to do is use vision models to say this is the old site, this is a new site, don't stop until they look the same. I find out this is the wrong approach,
Okay.
not because it can't work, but because it's slow. It's
Oh,
it's
interesting.
very slow. It's like death by a million cuts. In particular, what I found out, and I'm going to show it really quickly, but the site itself, so this is running in Docker, and I'll talk about that in a moment here, but the site itself actually has quite a bit of CSS. And I think that might be the root cause, is that a lot of the models were chunking the CSS. They'd read lines from 1 to 99 and then 100 to 200, et cetera, for a file that's about 3,000 lines. It would take a lot to have that in context. And then by the time it went to get to the other site to compare them, it was already lost, kind of thing. I think normally what I would do as a human is download those CSS files and look at them because they're quite large. So I'm just going to quickly look at the actual CSS itself. So if we go into our project, and this is in Windsurf, I'll get rid of some of the sidebars here, but we'll quickly go into our project and look at our style sheet. And you can see there's a lot of files in here. I was going a little bit ham on the testing. So we don't need to look at all of these, but if we look at our style sheet, which I think is moved to public in here, and then let's look at our styles. So there's a lot of styles in here, and not all of them are used. And I feel like if I was writing this code, this is what would happen to me. I think we're actually missing like 500 lines as well, because I've gone through and trimmed this down about
Wow.
a bit, but I feel like this is where it was choking. And again, there's nothing wrong with this file or anything like that. I think this is
Mm-hmm.
honestly a pretty standard length for CSS these days. So we're using a lot of classes, and we're using the cascading to apply different classes to different areas. So it can get pretty complicated. on its own. Now, the other thing I noticed is that there's some other pages in here that are a little bit more complicated than others. In fact, one of them, the resource pages, which are pretty cool, have an inbuilt graphic. So this background here is built into the style. And again, no harm, no foul. It's cool because it's got base64, it's right in there. And then color shifts between them. So it's actually pretty interesting. But when the LLM tried to read the base64, I feel like this might be like an anti-security or anti-SQL injection kind of production. It actually would choke on base64 a lot. I have to instruct it to, hey, write that out to a file, or maybe use a temporary store, but absolutely don't try to put this into your memory because you're having a really hard time with it. And it's not that big. It's not a big file, but the model definitely had issues. Now, I'm saying the model in this case, I started with Gemini 2.5 Pro because I hadn't used it before. And the cool thing about that model is it's multimodal. So I could have it examine like the look and feel of one side and look at the other. Pretty good, but it meant when I had to explore the web, I had to use an MCP, which I'll get to here. So I was using Puppeteer as an MCP. And in order to use Gemini with Puppeteer, it meant that I had to go through a long, arduous process of opening the site, taking a screenshot, looking at the screenshot, and doing the same thing for the other. What I noticed is if I was using Sonnet 3.7, for example, it had web search built in, but didn't have the bimodal, or at least I couldn't get it to compare things on my end. I don't think it is multimodal. And as a result, I went back and forth between two models most of the weekend, using the strengths of one and the strengths of the other to do things. And again, having spent 3 days on this, I can obviously think of a better way to do this. I think as an N8N user, you could probably think it'd be a pretty good workflow, or maybe I could add this to cursor rules or use the memory. But what I'd like to talk about, because I only touched on it previously a little bit when we talked about Windsurf, is how to actually set up the MCP shortcuts. So for MCPs, what's a little bit different in Windsurf as opposed to Cursor, for example, is that though you can add them manually, there also is a list of servers, which is handy. One of them that I want to use, Playwright, for some reason doesn't seem to work on Mac ARM64 right now. I'm sure it'll get fixed. Playwright itself definitely does work, but this MCP seemed to have issues with it. So I ended up using Puppeteer as opposed to, I've removed it now, but basically what you do is just hit add and then hit save config, and that's it. So it's saved to your config. We'll go look at it in a second. But the other one that I used was Sequential Thinking, which I think is in here. Right here. So sequential thinking will do similar to Aider or Claude Code. It will do one thing and then continue on to the next step, which is actually quite handy. So the combination of these two MCPs actually got me very far. So if you can open up your source site in Puppeteer and your destination site in Puppeteer, and then go through and sequentially think about the changes that need to be made, it actually works quite well. There's a bit of, I don't know if you've watched The Simpsons, you know, when Homer's in charge of the power plant, but he's working remotely and he's got the little bird that just clicks okay. There's a little bit of that in here. So think about the danger that would happen if you're just auto-saving your file. So the first thing I did was create a new branch, and I told it to only use that branch. Now, I set up some pre-commit checks that we may see here in a moment that were perhaps not the best checks, but as a result, I realized that the LLM, both models, would go around the checks if they got in the way. So there's pros and cons there for different things, as well as set up some rules to not save API keys. And I noticed this morning, for example, that one of them was saved in a Terraform file. But be that where it is. So what we can do here is start a new chat. And I can do things like, say, browse the local Docker site using Puppeteer, which is our MCP. Now, I'm not going to say MCP Puppeteer here, though you could if you really need to coax it. And compare it. And I'm just saying prod site here, not production, and not giving the URL because I believe I've got a memory that points to it. There we go. Okay, so what I'm hoping will happen is that we'll pop up Puppeteer and I can drag it over to show that it's driving the website. I think the first thing it's going to do is see if it's actually working, and it is up, so I can drag that over. It's running on Docker Desktop already. We can see the port here. This is how we were looking at the site a moment ago. And what it should do is pop up Puppeteer with a headless Chrome browser, showing you what exists in the target, which is our test environment, and then what exists in the source, which is our prod environment. And then you can see it here as it's going through, it's sequentially thinking through that process. Now, some of this that you're seeing is actually through Claude's Sonnet 3.7, but when Claude's done, it will actually go back to the MCP and tell it to continue from where it's left off. Now, you could do something similar to this by using a to-do file. In fact, I did use that quite a bit. But let's see if it actually goes through the whole thing here. Okay, so it's literally just checking to see if the Docker container is running. But you can see that there's a lot of steps involved here. And this is really handy because otherwise what you'd be doing is doing all of these on your own, like approving, should you do this, now check this, now that thing. In some of these cases, it might be easier just to stop it and say, hey, it's already started. I found that files will be like half edited if I do it that way. It feels like it's best to go through the entire process, but big but here, if you see that it's doing something that's like a security problem, or perhaps it's going down the wrong path, or it's creating a whole bunch of new files that it doesn't need, or it's made a new branch, these are all warning signs. So you definitely need to watch this like a hawk. So watch it closely. Don't auto approve anything. Read these lines. Don't just watch YouTube while you're doing it. Maybe listen to a podcast, which is what I was doing at the same time. But you do need to visually be watching what's happening. So it looks like in this case, it's running on port 4321. It's found port 4321. So it seems like it knows it's already running. Then it's going to go ahead. Now, what you may be noticing in here is that it's YOLO running my command line. Again, big warning. What I would suggest is approving only the commands that you want. So I'll talk about those in a second. But it did open up. You can see that this is in a private browser. It did open up Docker. It's going through the site and using it. I've also got this set up with Datadog Rum as well, so I can see what pages it's hitting in case it's missed pages when it does tests. But the combination of these two tools actually got me very far. So again, we're talking about MCPs and Windsurf in the YOLO mode. So it can run command line tools, it can do web browsing, and can think in a sequence, which is pretty handy. Now, we're using 3.7, so I can't do that image comparison the same way. It will generally take a screenshot and compare those screenshots as a result. Neither good nor bad. There's pros and cons to that approach as well. It depends on the window sizing. It might look quite a bit different. So the match score could be pretty low if the window sizes aren't good. But the other approach is comparing the CSS, which can take a long time.
I just saw the screen blink a little bit, didn't I?
Yes.
Okay, so is that it in action?
Yeah, it's still going. So still looking at the two.
Another question I have too is you turned on the Sequential Thinking MCP.
Yes.
And we're using Claude 3.7 Sonnet, which is a thinking model.
Yeah, and there's two ways to use it, with thinking and without, but we're definitely in thinking mode. Yep.
Okay. Do those help each other, or do they conflict with each other, or do they ignore each other? Or how's it work?
Okay. Yeah, they're complementary. So when we do the MCP tool calls, they look like this. So we can see that it's got an MCP tool, and this is probably when it was flashing. The other is in the thought process. So there's a Sonnet thought process, which is this. And then when it goes to sequential thinking mode, it will get back into this MCP tool. But you're pointing out a good point, because I don't actually see the thinking process. And in some cases, you actually do have to say MCP sequential thinking for it to do it. I thought the rule would pick it up, but we'll talk about the rules here in a moment, as opposed to the memories. So Windsurf wants to use memories, and it says that it can automatically remember things that you want it to. I will say yes, but also in terms of logical fallacies and stuff like that, it gets into trouble. So if I say, hey, I want you to use Docker and Datadog for testing, is one of the things that I told it to memorize or put in the memory. As a result, what it wrote down was use Docker to do any Datadog testing, which is similar, but not the same as what I asked. So you've got to go through and call your memories as well. So it sounds similar, but it's definitely not the same. And it's probably not what you want to do. You don't need to spin up Docker in order to use Datadog. In fact, I taught it how to use the Datadog CLI. We're putting that in scare quotes too, but basically said, hey, you've got access to the CLI tool. Please use that as well, which I thought was maybe more handy.
Yeah. The one that I'm just not ready to give the keys to is GitHub. I'm too worried that, I don't know, just like over the weekend when you pushed out a new
10,000 commit. Yeah.
And I was like, wait a second, did he do that? Or did an AI do that?
Because the AI did it. And right. And it's no human. I'm pretty good at coding. No human's going to make that amount of changes in that short a time. In fact, thinking about the project, like this project doesn't need 10,000 changes straight up. It's just not required.
You know what I mean? Like the more I dig into Astro, like there is like a large body of files and things that go along with the deployment,
right?
More than we have with just the HTML. I guess that's not true, because we do have transcripts and other stuff that we sort of account for in different ways. But anyway, it is. I just accepted that it's just a big deployment.
Yeah, it is a big deployment. And whenever it comes to Node, you're going to have a ton of packages as well. So it depends on what you're doing. I also noticed as I was going through, I made a test folder and started including tests. that those screenshots can build really quickly. It could end up with 30, 40, depending on how many times I run the test. It could get a little bit difficult to manage. So I put that into git ignore as well. The other thing is managing that git ignore as you go along. So again, if you're talking about GitHub, you got to protect your PAT, you got to protect your SSH key. There's a whole bunch of things that you need to protect. So what I said is actually I prefer the MCP not use GitHub, but here's a CLI and you can use it for status and you can push to test only. You cannot, like, don't pass go, don't use anything else. And again, I'm watching it like a hawk. This morning, it created a new branch, which I forgot to tell it, no, you can't create a new branch just to get around some of these rules. Like, you actually have to push to the test branch. So I had to add that to the rules as well. So we were talking about sequential thinking. So it did actually do sequential thinking up here. So it can see that it's gone through 8 thoughts. It doesn't need a next thought in this case. So it's done. And then it tried to summarize at the end, which is pretty handy. As we were using Claude, it was thinking about the problem rationally, which is good. And as a result, we were checkpointing through the sequential thinking, driving that process as we go through. The last thing I'll say, for some of these sessions, they can get pretty long. Like, these are my memories and rules, and we'll talk about it, but some of these sessions can get so long that it has a hard time with the context just of what it's done, let alone your code or what have you. And as a result, some memories seem like they get pushed out, or some sequences are forgotten. So I would say it feels like the 2-hour mark-ish is about the time to create like a new session. Checkpoint your work, push to Git, move on, that kind of thing.
I wonder if there's a technical term for that. It's like the Dunbar's number. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I don't know what the number is, but I know Dunbar. It's like you can only handle so much in your head at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. There's only so many like people you can maintain actual real relationships.
Yeah, is it 100 friends or something like that?
I don't remember the exact number.
It's
I was
probably
thinking it
way
was
less.
closer to 200 or more, but
Okay.
we got computers in front of us. I guess we could just look this up.
Yeah, fair enough. Just Google it.
Dunbar
While you're doing that, I'm just going to go through some of these.
150. Yeah, I guess
150? Okay, so between both what we said.
It's a cognitive limit to the number of social relationships a person can maintain, where they know each individual and the relationships with each other. This number was proposed by anthropologist Robin Dunbar in the 90s.
Wow, that is awesome.
Anyway, so it's similar to that. Like, it just loses the plot. I feel like that's like a thing I keep saying with these. After a while,
I lost the plot. Yeah, it feels like it's forgotten what it was doing. Yeah. So I just pulled up one of these memories just to show what it looks like. So generally what I would say in all caps is add to memory, this kind of thing, because I want to make sure that it was added there. I definitely did not write out all of this, and I'm not sure if all of this is correct. So some of this, I ran into issues with rollup and ESBuild on ARM64. Some of this is the Docker image that we were using may not have been the right Docker image. So started off with Alpine, for example, and I feel like the model wasn't well versed in Alpine APK operations, so I swapped over to Ubuntu and then eventually just swapped to the official Node one because they have different flavors for ARM64, x64, AR64, or what have you. So just using the different flavors help things move along. This is what I did in the first place. But as we go through and start adding these memories in, you can see that there's quite a few of them in here. You can add stuff that help. Now, a couple of these in here are for Context 7. Have you played around with Context 7 before?
I have not.
Okay. One thing I'll say is there's a caveat here in that I don't necessarily trust MCPs, and I'm sure Context 7 is fine in dealing with your private data that you're sending it. So I would say do not send API keys to an external MCP provider, for example, the same way as you wouldn't for an API, it might be logged, what have you. So that's one of the first things that came to my mind is like, hey, don't write the API keys to the project, because if you're calling out an MCP tool that's run by somebody else, I don't want my code to land there. I definitely don't want my API keys to land there. If we're talking about boilerplate Astro, that's totally fine. What Context 7 is a repository for a bunch of docs together. And in this case, what I wanted was Astro, and I wanted Vite. I think it's Vite. It might be Vite. And then Vitest is probably how Americans say this, but it sounds like Vitest to me, which is like another way to say speed. So anyway, we'll say Vitest. So I want these three, and they weren't in the cursor docs, which was the issue. So if we go back to cursor and look at Cascade, I'll just quickly pull up the docs. So in here, there's a lot. In fact, I ended up playing around with making my own MCPs for Datadog just for funsies. But like going through these, it's pretty cool. You can look through the MCP docs or maybe look through the 11T docs. There's some Next.js docs in here. I think there may have been some Netlify. Yeah, there were, in fact, Netlify docs, which were, in fact, very handy as somebody who didn't know Netlify at all, but has deployed to it a couple times from some of these vibe coding tools like Lovable, or what was the other one? think there's quite a Bolt, I think is the other one. But being able to deploy quickly to Netlify is great. But once you've deployed, there's a whole bunch of other stuff you need to worry about. Yeah. How often does it deploy? Is it actually working? Just because it deployed doesn't mean it's good. There's building as well for Astro, making sure that we're spitting out the right files. At any rate, so I want to combine those docs together. There's one problem with Context 7 in that you need to manually add it to Windsurf, but it's not that difficult. I'm just going to pull up those docs here now, and I'll show them to you. My apologies. I think this should work. So this is from Upstash. We'll pull them over here. And I won't go over this too long, but basically it's got pretty up-to-date info on how to actually add these into your client. So I talked to you a little bit about this morning, but I was surprised you could add this kind of stuff to Claude Desktop, basically. So in there, you can add MCP tools now, which is phenomenal. In fact, if you want to pull up something from multiple sources of docs, I feel like this is a great way to do it. Give me boilerplate for Vitest and Netlify, for example. No problem whatsoever. Now, in Cursor and in Windsurf, there's a way to install it using npx here, which I think is what I used, and it works pretty well. But what I found interesting is that you could use Bun or Dino, which I had not seen before.
Yeah, I didn't know you could do Bun.
I didn't either, yeah. NPX is pretty handy. There's other ways of doing it in here. There's Zed, there's NPX, there's different clients that you can do, but you can also do it in Docker. Now, I thought this was pretty interesting because I would like to, in fact, log all of the calls that go to Context 7 to ensure, in fact, that the traffic that I'm sending is okay, and maybe ship those logs off to a Steam tool or what have you. What we're going to do, though, is just grab this NPX up at the top. So this is for Cursor. We're going to grab Windsurf, which is this. It's very similar. We don't need the MCP service block, I don't think, but I'm going to grab it just because this manual block might be a little bit different than the auto block. So again, in settings, and we're going into Windsurf settings and MCP server. So we can go to add server here, but what I'm going to do is look at the raw config. And okay, I'm just going to format this a little bit better. Okay, so we've got Puppeteer, Sequential Thinking, Context 7. Make sure this looks right. Okay, that looks okay. So now we've got the MCP server installed, and what we should be able to do is pull up the docs. So in here, I can say, and generally I've found that you don't need to type MCP every time, as mentioned, but it seems like the first couple times you use it, it does need that little hint, like, hey, I've got a tool for this, it's new, please use it. I had 2 rules in there that said this because I really wanted to use it every time. I still don't feel like it picked it up every time I tried to use its internal docs, but let's see if it can pull it up. And the way we can tell is that we'll have that little bar that looks a little bit different.
Yeah. And we should point out, too, V5 of Astro is the latest.
Yes, and I'm using, I think, 5.73, which got a few little changes in it, but 5 is definitely the latest. And okay, perfect. So it is using Context 7. It's pulling up the version that we want in order to pull up the docs for the version, which is great. And you can see that it's using sequential thinking in order to go through it. And now it's thinking, okay, so it's got docs and it's got my code and it's going to compare the practices between them. It's a fairly complicated question, actually. And it's a good question for beginners. Okay, you're doing something. It's working. Are you doing it the right way? Or what are your peers doing? Or are there other GitHub repos out there that use the same version that can do this? I've found using the web is actually a really good one. It's like when it comes up with the conclusion and says everything looks great, I will say, hey, can you quickly check the web as well? And Sonnet's great at web searches and pulling back useful info and combining the two. And what I really got out of this, and maybe the reason why I did this all weekend, is because I was learning about new HTML processes, new CSS procedures, as well as learning a new tool and getting things working and tested in Netlify. It was like it's more than a trifecta. It's a 4-fecta, a 5-fecta out of it. It felt amazing. Like doing 3 or 4 things at once, basically. Learning, coding, working on something with JSON. Like, this is phenomenal.
Yeah, I've had that feeling. It's like it's a flow state for sure, and it's just fun.
Yeah, totally agree. Now, between these calls, especially because they're pretty long, this can take a while, like 5 minutes wouldn't be out of the norm, for example. What I will say is when it's done, generally what I'll say is add this to the to-do. So the goal is to either checkpoint your work or check off something that you've done. But you can't just end there. We need to say that we've done something, because if I stop this session and start again later, it might not have all the context, that kind of thing. So
where's that to do?
I'll pull that
file?
up here. In fact, it's spilled over into the README, so we'll look at that in a moment, but it's right here.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And let's see if we can preview it. Perfect. Where is the preview? There we go. I do find the preview pretty handy. And let's pull this out. Oop.
Yeah, it gets a little
You
crowded
know
on
the note at
screen
the
there.
top because it did spill over into README, which I'll show in a moment.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and you can see some of the changes that I've made as well.
It's not just a to-do, it's a changelog.
It is. That's a good point. It's becoming like what's changed in this version.
Or, yeah, a changelog, but also just a historical look back on your roadmap as this thing has evolved.
Yeah, and also I find that some of the things in here, this, for example, isn't fixed, and this is a problem that I was dealing with this morning, is that it was trying to pass the key to GitHub workflows, but it should not. So I ended up doing Docker GitHub workflows, the whole thing. I just slap some DevOps on it. Let's go.
Yeah, workflows are great for that.
Yes, I would agree. But that's it. It's not a lot. There's quite a bit that happened. But in terms of what I actually learned, it sounds like importing HTML with globs is very easy in Astro, and it probably could have been done in 5 minutes if I just asked Claude to do it. But I did learn a lot more. Claude Code, sorry. I did learn a lot more about it in the process, defining those tests. So going through Vitess tests and making it use those against it to make sure I knew that the sites looked the same and that they're visually identical.
Yeah, and I jokingly said on Friday, like one of the last things I said to you was just let's send it over to Claude and see if it can help us come up with a migration script. And
I think you might have even said it, and this is my voice for yours because you made it long. It was like, "Oh, Claude," like ring a bell.
Oh, Claude, yeah, exactly. Because it's been my go-to for like literally any problem I run into. I'm like, I wonder if Claude can solve this. And here we are with another problem of we'd like to move our basic HTML, JavaScript, CSS site to a real content management system called Astro. How you get from A to B, don't care. Don't want to know.
Yep.
Just get there. And we did, or you did.
Yeah, I certainly got it working. I will say that there are some discrepancies here and there. I think you found that the form looked a little bit weird this morning, for example.
Visual things.
What I found interesting is that even though I kept telling it, please just import the HTML, it consistently tried to rewrite it, that's okay. That's totally fine. Mm-hmm. It felt like at some point in time, I would expect the model to say, hey, Markdown might actually be better for this, or Markdown or MDX might be better for this. But at no point was that a suggestion, which I found pretty funny, actually. Mm-hmm. It did create an example episode, which I think I can pull up here early on, as a way to, let's pull them up. My apologies. They're in here.
One of the other things that's tricky with at least the episode pages is that they contain the transcript, which some of them can be quite lengthy, which, again, depending on what tokens and context is being sent around, like that is just adding to the noise, maybe. I don't know if noise, but adding to that overflow, that buffer that we have of memory. I don't know. I feel like I'm using words that aren't quite the right words, but they still fit the bit.
Yeah, it feels like that context window, basically. The amount of context that we're sending every time is overwhelming it. Would agree. I also, just for funsies, said, hey, what would Jason think? Like, you've seen all these transcripts. What would Jason think of this? It was like, oh, it made a fake bio for you as a senior front-end developer or something like that as well at one point in time. So I was like, oh, okay, you seem to know who Jason is. What would Jason think of this? And they used you as a persona, essentially. Using the Jason persona, what would they think of the project kind of thing? And it felt like optimizing for speed and delivery was the main thing that the models were trying to recommend Jason would push forward. I'm not sure if that's true, if that's what you'd optimize for.
Talk to my therapist.
Yeah, it's certainly what I was working on at the time, so I feel like it confused the two. I'm not Jason. Do you think I'm Jason?
Cool.
But yeah, that's it. MCPs that can auto be added. Puppeteer is super easy. Sequential thinking, super easy. Playwright for me on Mac on ARM64 I had issues, just with, I think it's a pathing issue. But Puppeteer will get you most of the way there. You can use Playwright in the command line. It can run the command line, and it can run Datadog, Datadog CLI, Datadog SCA, and Datadog itself, which I thought were awesome. Like, hey, is the service running? Is APM running? Those kind of questions are easy. Is the site deployed? Has it built? Does it have the new changes that we just added to the code? Easy peasy. And then the two MCPs that I showed you, as well as adding context 7 for your docs. But again, remember, don't send sensitive info to third-party MCPs when you add them.
All right, cool. I appreciate you showing us all that, and
Of course.
appreciate all the hard work over the weekend. Hopefully you did get outside and enjoy a little bit of
No,
something non-technical.
it wasn't as nice here as it was there, I think. So
Oh, really?
don't worry about it. It's pretty
Okay.
overcast here. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I guess there's a few things we got to go dig into a little bit, but we are so close to having what we set out to do just as recent as Friday. Which
Agreed.
was like half a workday ago. Yeah. Pretty
Yeah.
exciting stuff.
It feels like an accelerator. I got to say, for quick and easy conversions, deployments, migration, this feels like a quick first step.
Yeah, I agree. And okay, cool. Appreciate you showing us all that. And we'll go ahead and say goodbye here and see you on the next one.
Fantastic. Bye, folks.
See you.